we've come a long way. Let's see where that journey leads 1,000,000 years from now. 1,000,000 is a funny number. It's big enough to feel almost abstract, whether we're talking about years in the future or subscribers on this channel. And as we hit that milestone, it felt like a good time to ask a much bigger question. What does humanity look like in the year 1 million AD? By then, we may have spread across the galaxy, reshaped our bodies and minds, and learned to experience time in ways that make 1,000,000 years feel like a lifetime, or a long weekend. We may not even agree on what it means to be human anymore. There's also a chance that some of us alive today might still be around to find out. So, grab a drink and a snack, subscribe if you're not one of the million folks who already have, and let's take a look at the year 1 million AD. The Galaxy by 1 million AD. When we talk about 1,000,000 years in the future, the first question we have to ask is a simple one. How far could we actually go? Because the galaxy is big, but not that big. The Milky Way is about 100,000 light years across, surrounded by a halo of stars and dwarf galaxies extending even further out. That sounds enormous, and it is, but on a 1,000,000-year timescale, it becomes surprisingly manageable. If you travel at or near the speed of light, you can cross the galaxy multiple times in that span. Even at just 10% of light speed, you can still traverse the entire galaxy in 1,000,000 years, and that's assuming a fairly conservative approach to interstellar travel. We have ship designs like Orion or Medusa that can probably get us to a few percent of light speed, and it would let us get to most of the galaxy by then. If we have options like nuclear fusion or antimatter or beamed propulsion, which I think we certainly would by then if they were at all possible, it should make colony ships moving 10% or even much faster viable to let us expand out from Earth. But in practice, you probably wouldn't expand as a simple, slow-growing sphere centered on Earth. You'd cheat. You see, it takes fuel not just to speed up, but to slow down, and indeed even voyages of 10,000 years in generation ships would still use less energy for life support than you need to slow that ship back down from 10% or 20% of light speed. You can go far faster if you can brake for free, in whole or part. So instead of just spreading outward evenly, you might deliberately seed distant parts of the galaxy early, send fleets far ahead, not to nearby stars, but to carefully chosen targets tens of thousands of light years away. A close pass around a black hole, especially a binary pair, can act as a gravitational brake, bleeding off enormous amounts of velocity and letting you turn for free to come out at a new vector and speed, higher or lower than you begin with as you choose. Or you might skim the ultra-thin outer layers of a red giant star, using its atmosphere and its ample solar wind to slow down. These become natural anchor points, places where a fast-moving colony ship can arrive, shed its speed, and establish a new hub of expansion. Both are also likely rich in power generation and raw materials, so instead of one expanding bubble, you get a network. Multiple expansion centers, scattered across the galaxy. They then expand outward from them like a raindrop falling on a pond and rippling outward. This is a similar approach to how you might colonize things if you had wormholes, which is generally the faster-than-light method I consider the least implausible. See our Wormhole Stapleways episode for more discussion. But that leads to another important point. Colonization is not a step-by-step process where you settle one planet, wait 10,000 years, and then move on to the next. It's overlapping waves. When a new system is settled, it won't be the frontier colony that sends out the next wave. It'll be the older, more developed systems close to the center of expansion. They have the infrastructure, the population, and the industry to keep pushing outward. Those new worlds, the ones most recently settled, can supply information and aid to passing interstellar arc ships. They can even send small contingents of people and supplies to join an arc fleet that mobilize closer to the core, and may even have left before that colony had actually been established. Indeed, an arc fleet might pass by a system more recently founded than its origin world on a journey to a new system, only to be passed a few decades later by a ship that came from that former frontier outpost. So too, we could have ships that only stop to resupply fuel and raw materials to new worlds and drop off half their colonists, and breed back up to full strength in the intervening decades to the next world, what we call a gardener ship. So you don't get a chain where a world gets settled, grows for thousands of years, and then sends out a ship to the next empty world, rinse and repeat, as we see in percolation theory. Instead, you get what at a large scale appears to be a growing sphere, large expanding shells of sediment driven from the interior, or the local black hole hub leapfrogging outward. The frontier keeps moving, but it's powered by everything behind it, not just what's at the edge. And once you factor in population growth, things accelerate even more. Even very modest growth rates compound quickly over long timescales when there is room, resources, and will to grow. If a population doubles every couple of centuries, a rate that would feel slow to us now, that's still explosive over tens or hundreds of thousands of years. Double just once a century, and you go from 1 million people to 1 trillion in one star system in just 2,000 years, a quadrillion in another 1,000. But pioneers can double their numbers multiple times a century when resources permit and when they want to, and for post-biological civilizations, or ones using cloning or duplication, those limits might be even looser. They might go from a small seed to a full Dyson swarm in a couple of centuries. Probably not faster. There are some real limits on how fast you can disassemble planets even with gray goo, as we saw in the episode Harvesting Planets. So filling a solar system, really filling it, building out habitats, megastructures, and industry doesn't take long on these timescales. Reaching something like a Kardashev Type 2 civilization, harnessing the full output of a star, might take thousands of years or even tens of thousands of years if you grow slower than we do now. That sounds like a long time, till you remember we have 1 million years to work with, which means that even if a small seed colony reached a star system early on, it would likely have had more than enough time to fully develop by the present day in our scenario. And that leads us to a striking conclusion. If the galaxy had been broadly settled even 100,000 years before the year 1 million AD, say around 900,000 AD, then by now you would expect to see a patchwork of early colonies. You'd expect maturity. Most, if not nearly all, star systems would already be heavily developed. Many would likely be operating at or near Kardashev Type 2 levels, fully utilizing the energy of their stars. And taken together, that starts to look like a Kardashev Type 3 civilization. Not necessarily uniform, not centrally organized, but collectively using a substantial fraction of the galaxy's total energy output. Of course, that doesn't mean every system looks the same. Some regions might remain lightly settled, by choice or circumstances. Others might be intensely developed, packed with habitats and infrastructure. Some civilizations might deliberately limit their energy use, while others push toward maximum expansion. The Kardashev scale isn't really a ladder you climb, it's a landscape you spread across. But the key takeaway is this. 1 million years is not just enough time to reach the stars, it's enough time to reach almost all of them, and to transform them. 1 million years before tomorrow. Tomorrow is always just minutes away. At least that's how it feels to us, creatures running on slow, wet hardware where thoughts crawl along at the speed of nerve impulses. Your brain signals move at something just under the speed of sound, while light, nature's true speed limit, is over 1 million times faster, and that gap is enormous and important. Because what we think of as normal time isn't really time at all. We are gauging it by our experience of passing events. That's generally consistent for us, as individuals and as a species sharing the same brain architecture and hardware, but it's not a fundamental property of consciousness. It's just the speed our biology happens to run at. Change the hardware and you change time itself, or at least our experience of it, which is what we mostly mean when we talk about time. Now, mind you, a sufficiently advanced civilization might have ways to actually slow or speed up time in localized regions, bubbles of space where a year passes on Earth for every million outside, or vice versa. There are at least some plausible pathways to that in known physics. But here we're talking about something else, whether an individual, or even an entire civilization, could transition into digital or synthetic minds and simply accelerate their subjective experience. This is often called frame jacking, increasing the number of conscious moments experienced per second of real time, and my friend Dennis E. Taylor's excellent Bobaverse novels spend a lot of time exploring this idea. The key thing is, once you start changing subjective time, the numbers get wild very quickly. The speed of human thought, really the signals carrying it, peaks out at just over 100 meters per second, about 250 miles per hour. That's impressively fast by human standards, and tends to a couple hundred times faster than our slower, unmyelinated nerves, which operate down around walking to jogging speeds and are often involved in things like pain and temperature. Light, meanwhile, is a few million times faster than your quickest brain signals, and a few 100 million times faster than the slowest ones. Now, if you could think 1,000,000 times faster than a biological human, then 1 second of real time would feel like about 11.5 days. You'd have around a week to form a good reply to any comment or question someone asked you in a casual conversation, while you were still inhaling to respond. Or, alternatively, to prepare to ask them to blow your head off, since experiencing a single frozen moment like that would probably drive you to madness and despair. In practice, we'd expect people to use this in controlled ways, short bursts under their control or inside virtual environments running at a comfortable speed relative to them. Some might prefer to always run a bit faster than the baseline, maybe 10% quicker, just to have a little extra time, but more likely systems would adjust automatically. In a dangerous situation, your subjective time speeds up, letting you watch bullets drift by. In a quiet moment, it slows back down. You can dial it up and down at will. But there are limits. Speeding up thought isn't just about swapping neurons for faster wiring. Neurons take time to fire, and thoughts involve thousands or millions of them interacting. Simply speeding up communication between them does not solve the whole process. And then there's heat. Your brain is very carefully designed to shed it. Speed that brain up even a little and you risk damage. Speed up thousands of times and your head isn't just hurting, it's catching on fire. And don't assume computers automatically solve that problem. Before chatbots became the big headline, one of the major hype milestones in computing was building supercomputers that matched or exceeded what we estimate to be the processing power of a human brain. But your brain runs on about 10 watts, roughly a dim light bulb, while those machines used megawatts. You still have to dump that heat somewhere. And while our brains are three-dimensional structures optimized for cooling and conductivity, most of our computing hardware is still comparatively flat and space inefficient. Biology is slow, but it is astonishingly efficient. That doesn't mean we couldn't do better, but a post-human mind trying to think 1,000,000 times faster probably isn't just upgrading its processor. It's spreading out, offloading work into larger physical systems. Then again, most of your brain isn't doing anything conscious in the first place, so you don't necessarily need to scale conscious thought linearly with total brain capacity, but you will want a lot more subconscious processing too, especially for things you currently never even notice. But it is probably possible to create a human mind that runs 1,000,000 times faster, or even more, even if you had to offload some of that processing and tinker with perception and time flow architecture. Such being the case, 1 year would feel like 1,000,000 years, and 1,000,000 years in the outside universe, that could be experienced as trillions of years of internal history. You could imagine a group of post-humans who wanted to remain broadly human and modern in outlook, deciding to build themselves into an ice ball somewhere in the Oort cloud, running 1,000,000 times faster, maybe even within a century or so from now. Then, when the first interstellar colonists arrive at Alpha Centauri a century later, having experienced very little of that trip thanks to time dilation or suspended states, those minds in that simulated matrix ice ball would have lived through 100,000,000 years of history. I suspect that a great many minds existing by the year 1 million AD would fall into this category too, or be running even faster. By that point, they might have experienced quadrillions of years of subjective personal time, even though only 1,000,000 years had passed in the outside universe. An entire cosmic era, stars forming, galaxies colliding, civilizations rising and falling, might pass by like a brief intermission between thoughts. Or you might do the reverse. A digital civilization might choose to sprint forward, running at extreme speeds for short bursts of real time, then shut itself down for millennia, waiting for the universe to change. They could wake up every 1,000,000 years, check on the cosmos, make decisions, then go dormant again. From their perspective, time would not be a steady flow, but something more like a series of disconnected chapters, intense periods of activity separated by vast, dreamless gaps. They might live in fully synthetic realities, entire universes simulated at accelerated speeds, where subjective time stretches far beyond the lifespan of stars. Civilizations could rise, stagnate, collapse, and be reborn countless times, all within what, to an outside observer, was barely a flicker. We've discussed this before in our Civilizations Theme Time series, particularly in the episode Eternal Intelligence. But this isn't eternal or infinite. There are limits. Generally speaking, the faster you think, the more energy you burn per calculation, and the harder it is to radiate that waste heat away from whatever switches your mind runs on. Colder systems are vastly more efficient, but every degree you try to cool something takes far longer and longer to achieve by radiating heat away. At some point, speed becomes a trade-off, more thoughts per second but at a higher and higher cost per thought. And since your lifespan is effectively measured in thoughts and experiences, you may be better off running slower and lasting longer. On the other hand, running cooler reduces wear, maintenance, and energy demands, but time and practical constraints limit how far you can push that advantage. There are likely to be different sweet spots depending on what you're optimizing for. So even a frame-jacked civilization must choose. Do you live fast, burning bright and racing through subjective millennia in moments, or live slow, stretching your existence across the actual lifespan of the universe? Because once you decouple consciousness from biology, time stops being something you simply experience, and becomes something you get to choose. How would humanity evolve physically? So how would humanity evolve physically over 1 million years? The first thing to note is that in many ways, the question almost doesn't matter, because we won't likely be leaving it to chance. Give us even a few centuries, let alone 1 million years, and with genetic engineering and cybernetics, we could turn ourselves into almost anything. Centaurs, winged butterfly people living in microgravity habitats, aquatic variants for ocean worlds, or even minds distributed across machines or whole planets. You could redesign yourself to fit your environment or redesign the environment to fit you. You could inhabit a world, or become one. So if we're talking about what's possible, the answer is almost anything. But the more interesting question is what happens if we don't intervene too heavily. If humanity is left to drift, diverge, and adapt naturally across 1 million years and 1 million worlds. Because then, things get stranger. And this is plausible enough across trillions of worlds of the galaxy, and likely far more numerous and bottleneck-prone space habitats we would build. Many may choose to go a more natural or even techno-primitive route. All those different environments alone would start pulling humanity in different directions. Low-gravity worlds might favor taller, more fragile bodies. High-radiation environments might push toward thicker skin, redundancy, or entire different biochemistries. Ocean worlds might produce aquatic descendants. Mammals have apparently evolved into the sea and out again, so that could happen again, while microgravity habitats might favor lighter or more delicate forms that barely resemble anything we'd call human. And then there's culture. You could have groups that deliberately enhance themselves, stronger, smarter, more specialized, while others choose not to. Over 1 million years, even small differences like that could compound to something like a caste system, or eventually into entirely separate species. How many varying forms of human and human-close species did our single world produce in such a time, even without alien suns lighting our way down strange new paths? We've imagined this before, of course. The time machine gave us the Eloi and the Morlocks, one living in comfort and ease, the other adapting to darkness and hardship below. It's a bit dramatic, but the underlying idea isn't unreasonable. Developing a predator-prey cycle, and indeed you expect any organism that gained dominance over an environment to be quite likely to split into cousins who developed a predator-prey cycle with each other, especially as they diverged enough that there was no longer cannibalism. Because evolution doesn't aim upward, it doesn't try to make things smarter or stronger, it only favors what survives. And in a true paradise, a world where all needs are met, all dangers removed, you might not need to be especially strong or clever or resilient. Over time, those traits could fade. This is sometimes called the paradise trap, when maintaining a perfect world becomes easier than reinventing it, and the people living in it gradually lose the ability to rebuild it if it ever fails. That doesn't necessarily mean we'd all become foolish or helpless, but it does mean that simplification is just as likely as improvement. On the other hand, harsher environments or deliberate design choices could push in the opposite direction, toward hyper-specialized forms, hyper-intelligent forms, or entirely new kinds of bodies built for survival in extreme conditions. And over 1,000,000 years, that divergence adds up. You might have some branches of humanity that remain very close to us, recognizably human by choice or by tradition. Others might become so altered in mind or body that we never recognize them as our descendants at all. Some worlds might host beings of immense intelligence, perhaps spread across entire planetary networks, thinking at scales we can barely imagine. Others might host descendants that have simplified themselves so far they barely resemble complex animals anymore. Not because evolution failed, but because it succeeded in a different direction. And that's the key thing to remember. While an eventual omega point might be something we pursued, there is no final form of humanity waiting at the end of the Darwinian timeline, no perfect vision we're evolving toward. 1,000,000 years from now, humanity won't be one thing. It will be a spectrum, ranging from beings far beyond us to others that have, in some ways, left us behind by becoming something simpler instead. As I like to say about the Fermi paradox, travel far and long enough, and you will eventually encounter aliens, even if they're also very distant cousins. Are we still human? Once we start talking about humanity changing physically, the next question is harder and more important. At what point are we not human anymore? That question is trickier than it sounds, because human is not just a body plan. If it was, then a person with cybernetics, altered genes, 4 arms or gills for an ocean world might stop counting. Then so might someone with a missing limb or an extra finger. But I don't think most of us would say that. We tend to assume there is something deeper than anatomy or even DNA that makes someone human. The problem is that over 1,000,000 years, that deeper thing can change too, not just bodies but minds. A post-human civilization might not merely think faster, live longer, or occupy stranger forms. It might outgrow the psychology that shaped humanity in the first place. We evolved for short lives, small tribes, scarce resources, and memories brief enough that old pain and old lessons fade before they crush us. But what is the advantage of that psychology to a being that has lived for 10,000 years, or 1,000,000, or remembers every day of its life in perfect detail? Indeed, by subjective framejacking, they might have experienced billions of years, and they might even be a bit unglued in time, able to access every moment of their life, less like memories and more like replaying a recording. Many might opt for some mix of that and virtual worlds, revisiting favorite times with small variations over and over. So as psychological adventures go, at that point, the answer may be none at all. A very old mind might need to edit memory just to remain sane, or even rebuild itself entirely, discarding the patchwork architecture evolution gave us and designing something new from the ground up. It might damp down boredom, fear, rage, or grief. It might split itself into subminds, merge with others, back itself up, fork into copies, and rejoin later. It might choose to abandon competition, ambition, romance, tribalism, or even individuality itself. And this is not just a different body, this is a very different kind of mind. And that is where transhumanism becomes posthumanism. Transhumanism is still recognizably us, humanity enhanced, upgraded, repaired, or extended. Posthumanism is where that continuity starts to blur, not because something became monstrous, but because it became different enough in its thoughts, motives, values, and inner experience that human starts to feel more like ancestry than identity. Two descendants of humanity might meet 1,000,000 years from now and have no more in common psychologically than we do with wolves or chimpanzees. They may still share a history, perhaps even some fraction of the same genome, but one might think in milliseconds and another in centuries. One might live as a distributed cloud mind, and another as a baseline human colony preserving ancient traditions. One might value individual freedom above all else. Another might regard the self as a temporary illusion, best merged into a greater whole. They would not just look alien to each other, they would be alien to each other. That does not mean that humanity failed. It means humanity branched. And that may be the real answer here. In 1 million AD, humanity is probably no longer one thing you can point to. It is a family tree so vast and so divergent that some branches still seem familiar, while others have wandered so far from the trunk that they would never call themselves human at all. No more resembling that original tree than a chair or table that was carved from it. See our Post-Human Pathways episode for more discussion of the strange lanes our bodies and minds might travel down in the distant future. Earth in 1 million AD. So what is Earth like a million years from now? In some ways, it may be the most familiar place in the galaxy, and others the most alien, because Earth may no longer be just a planet. It may be a palimpsest planet, a world written over and over again by countless generations of civilization, layer upon layer. In older science fiction, especially in dying Earth genre, we often see worlds buried under the ruins of past civilizations, cities built atop cities stretching back into deep time. Indeed, this is often already the case, but in our case, those layers might not be crumbling ruins. They might still be intact. With sufficiently advanced materials, you don't have to let your cities decay. You can preserve them, seal them, build over them without destroying what came before. We can already manufacture materials like diamond and graphene made from abundant carbon, yet able to handle vast weights and timescales. Advanced automation and nanotechnology might make self-repair for buildings and objects incredibly easy. So over a million years, that could mean thousands of layers, entire buried worlds beneath our feet. Not all of them would be inhabited. Most might be quiet. Storage vaults, museums, archives, entire cities that are kept not for living in, but for remembering. After all, you don't need much energy to preserve a place. A dark sealed chamber can last almost indefinitely. In such a sealed setup, there is no need to heat it, quite the reverse. You don't need to light a room unless someone is actually there to see it. A person might even seal off a residence and return to it centuries later, after sleeping through eras while new layers grew above, or slumber there in stasis like a mummy. This might be a common way of passing time. Law and custom might encourage people to leave such places undisturbed, building around and over them instead. You might have apartment buildings thousands of meters high and as wide where most of the residents are on ice at any time. So Earth could accumulate vast volumes of preserved history, layer after layer of civilization, stacked like geological strata. A necropolis planet, not in the sense of death, but of memory. A place where the past is not lost, but stored. Of course, Earth would not just be layered, it would also be engineered. Over a million years, this is extraordinarily valuable real estate, the birthplace of humanity, the cultural and historical center of a civilization that may span a galaxy of billions and billions of stars and planets. Even if it is no longer politically central, it remains symbolically central, and that matters. You might see continuous construction, new layers, new habitats, new structures, built above and below, gradually transforming Earth into something far beyond its original form. Not just buried strata of old cities, but simultaneous layers of habitation, storage, and preservation. A vertical world, where some levels are vibrant and active, while others lie quiet as archives or museums. The main constraint is not space, but energy, feeding and lighting those layers sufficient for photosynthesis, assuming people still eat regular food. But for storage, lower power environments, and occasional use, you can build almost without limit. Over a million years, that could mean thousands of layers, most of them dark, stable, and rarely visited. Now Earth is no longer just a surface, it's a volume. And from there, you might decide not just to build Earth up, but to move it. Earth will be the cultural center of the galaxy for a long while, but maybe not that long, and it may decide it's wise to pick up and move itself nearer the physical center of the galaxy to help retain that status, and maximize tourists and trade too. Over a million years, relocating a planet or even an entire solar system is not impossible. You can build literal star drives, so perhaps you go toward the galactic core, where stars are denser and energy more abundant. After all, Earth itself has never stayed in one place. It orbits the Milky Way and likely began far closer to the galactic core. Over deep time, it has passed through very different regions of the galaxy, sometimes closer to the core, sometimes farther out, though generally edging outward. So a sufficiently advanced civilization might simply take control of that motion, not to escape, but to remain central. Or perhaps in the most extreme and ambitious case, you don't move Earth to the center of the galaxy. You move the center of the galaxy to Earth. We've talked before about building artificial shell planets with black holes in their center, and those can be vast indeed. The smallest black hole would permit a shell around it 1,000,000 times larger than Earth in living area with regular Earth gravity, and there's no limit on how big a black hole can be made, and they can't provide all the power you need for lighting and running your mega planet. So instead of relocating the planet, you might begin feeding material inward, abundant hydrogen, helium, or even dark matter, building towards something like a birch planet, a nested structure around an artificial mega black hole, with layer upon layer of habitable surface stacked inward and outward. We've spoken of building such immense structures around the supermassive black holes in galactic centers, but you could import matter galaxy-wide to make Earth bigger instead. A place with living space not for billions or trillions, but for numbers that defy easy comprehension. But even then, through all that growth, all that engineering, all that expansion, Earth would still carry something unique, because no matter how many worlds humanity spreads to, this is the one where it began. And over 1,000,000 years, that alone is enough to ensure that it is never abandoned, never forgotten, and never entirely replaced. Could you still be around? So after all of this, spreading across the galaxy, changing how we experience time, and becoming something far beyond our current forms, we come to a more personal question. Could you and I still be around 1,000,000 years from now? Not some distant descendant of humanity. You, me, people we know today, family and friends, persisting across hundreds of thousands of years. And the short answer is, it's entirely possible. In my opinion, it's even rather likely. When people ask me what technology I most want to see develop in my lifetime, the answer is always life extension. It's the keystone that lets me see all the others yet to be invented and 1,000,000,000 sunrises to come. We don't need 1,000,000 years of progress to make that technology happen. We may only need a few decades or centuries. If life extension technologies arrive within the next century, and there's a good chance they might, then many people alive today could simply keep going. Aging could become something we treat, slow, or even stop. And even if that takes longer, we already have rough imperfect options. Cryonics, for instance, is crude, but it may be good enough. You do not need perfect preservation today if tomorrow is capable enough to repair the damage. Someone alive today could be frozen and wake up in a world filled with vastly more advanced medicine. So the real question isn't whether someone alive now could reach that future, it's whether they could keep going once they get there. Because surviving 1,000,000 years is not the same as living one. Even in a stable, advanced civilization, one with abundant resources and strong safety systems, the odds of accidents, disasters, or simply bad luck add up over time. No matter what technology arrives to fix a person, if they go through various periods of depression or futility every few hundred years, there's thousands of bleak periods where they might decide they are done. But the odds of murder, accident, and suicide may also go down. Better medicine, safer environments, and the ability to back up or restore individuals could make long-term survival far more likely than it is today. And people wouldn't need to experience all that time continuously. You might spend centuries or millennia in stasis, waking occasionally to see what has changed. You might travel between stars on long voyages, hopping from world to world at relativistic speeds, or in stasis for the trip, living a few decades here, a few there, gradually making your way to the galaxy's edge and back. Maybe your house is still sitting there, tended by machines for your return, even if the planet itself has moved since then too, or undergone metamorphosis. Or you might do the opposite, stay in one place, but experience vast stretches of time in short bursts, waking once every century to check in on the universe before going back to sleep. There are many ways to cross 1,000,000 years, including going the long way round and experiencing every day of it, or even more at high subjective rates of experience. You might have spent 1,000,000,000 years spread through 1,000,000 virtual realms, king of hundreds, or a hermit philosopher in hundreds more. But that leads to a deeper question. Even if you could survive that long, would you still be you? Human memory isn't built for that kind of duration. We forget things, we compress them, we reinterpret them. Over decades, let alone millennia, even a normal human life already becomes a story we tell ourselves more than a perfect record. So to last 1,000,000 years, you might need help. You might offload memories, storing them externally and recalling them when needed. You might compress older experiences, keeping only what matters most immediately accessible. You might rely on recordings, perfect replayable versions of your past, while your day-to-day mind remains manageable and stable. Ironically, that might mean remembering more accurately and quickly than we do now, but also raises a question. If most of your life is stored outside your immediate mind, if your memories are edited, compressed, or partially external, are you still the same person? That answer is not as obvious as it sounds. After all, we already change over time. The person you were 20 years ago is not identical to who you are today. Your memories have faded, shifted, been reinterpreted, and yet we still consider that a continuous self. So perhaps continuity does not require a perfect memory. Perhaps it just requires enough connection that you still recognize yourself as you. And if that's true, then there is a path, maybe narrow, maybe broad, that leads from here, today, to 1,000,000 years from now, where someone like you, or me, is still around. Not as a distant descendant, but as a person who simply kept going. Now, of course, most minds in that far future will not be us. They will be new beings, new branches of humanity, or something else entirely. Some may be as strange to us as aliens, but there may be a few of us who remember, who were there at the beginning. And, if I'm wrong about this, if none of us make it that far, then I suppose no one will be around to complain. But, if I'm right, perhaps we'll meet up somewhere for a drink and a snack, in the year 1 million AD. Today we are celebrating benchmarks and looking 1,000,000 years in the future at how humanity might evolve, spread, and transform across vast stretches of time. If you enjoy thinking about those long horizons, that's exactly the kind of idea I explore in Settling Saturn's Rings, this month's exclusive. We look at how one of the solar system's most iconic features could become a massive construction zone, supporting habitats, infrastructure, and civilizations that might endure not just centuries, but geological timescales. And in Joe Scott's Nebula Original, Oldest and Newest, he travels from the oldest rocks on Earth to brand new land emerging from volcanoes today. That's just some of the amazing original and exclusive content on Nebula, where every episode of SFIA premieres early and completely ad-free. That includes over 800 episodes and several years of monthly exclusives like Settling Saturn's Rings. You can see that and Joe Scott's epic journey through Earth's history. Just use my link or the QR code to get 50% off an annual plan. Just $30 for the whole year. And that brings us to the year 1 million AD, a future where humanity may have spread across the galaxy, changed what it means to think, to live, and even to be human, and yet still, in some small way, remain connected to where we began. And, speaking of beginnings, this episode also marks a milestone for the channel. 1 million subs. And while the big gold play button probably won't arrive for months, I didn't want to wait even days to mark the occasion. When I started the show, it was just a small hobby project exploring big ideas. I never expected us to reach 1,000 subscribers, let alone 1,000,000. I actually didn't even know what a subscriber was when I made that first episode back in 2014. It was a couple of years before I even started thinking of it as a show. We did a special when we hit 100,000 subscribers in 2017, and at the time people said 1,000,000 would be just around the corner. I laughed that off, but I figured it might happen someday, and promised I'd do an episode called 1 million AD when it did. And the episode title itself is a nod to 2000 AD and a lot of science fiction from when I was a kid that was looking forward to the turn of the millennia. It's hard to believe sometimes it's been 26 years since then, and over the years I've written and rewritten bits of this episode, always imagining it as a collection of chapterized essays, which was a bit unusual for my style at the time, since I always thought of each episode as a standalone essay. It is a bit amusing that in the last year or so I've shifted more intentionally to a chapter format anyway, partly because it's easier to film now we're on camera instead of doing a voiceover, and partly because, during the great shorts push of 2023 and 2024 by YouTube, it seemed like everything might be heading that direction, so that each episode might need to be broken into a dozen shorts to satisfy the algorithm. Before that, live streams were the craze, and before that, everyone said I was foolish for doing 30-plus minute episodes when all the other science shows aimed at 3 to 10 minutes. Ironically, of the couple hundred shorts I've done since then, I only pulled from episodes a handful of times. I usually just wrote new material, since I always seem to have more to say. That is the neat thing about the future, there's always so much more of it. And the show itself has changed in other ways too. A large portion of audience now listens off YouTube, on Spotify, iTunes, Nebula, Audible, and elsewhere. And between those platforms and the natural churn of viewership, we likely passed this million milestone years ago anyway. It's just nice to finally officially mark it. And it may well be the last big one for a while, until we hit 1,000 episodes, somewhere around 2027. Life has been an interesting journey personally. The show began as a hobby for me after leaving academia and then the military, hoping for a slower-paced and more relaxed life out in the countryside. It became a job, and the best one I could imagine. And along that trip I got married, bought a farm, adopted 3 children, and became president of the National Space Society. Along the way, this has grown into something much larger than I ever expected, thanks to all of you watching, sharing, discussing, and helping shape what this show has become. To everyone who's been part of that journey, viewers, supporters, volunteers, collaborators, thank you. From the folks who help model discussion forums on Facebook, Reddit, and Discord, to those who help edit scripts, or make graphics, or helped in a dozen other ways, donated your hard-earned money, time, shared episodes, or just those that hit the like and subscribe buttons, thank you. We have come a long way, but as we've seen today, this journey is just getting started. There is so much more to dream and discuss. And until next time, as always, thanks for watching and have a great week.